Adding 1 milligram of Viagra in the water of a cut flower's vase will make them stand straight up 1 week longer than their natural life.
This is Exploring Unusual Sex, the podcast about odd stuff that helps understanding everyday matters. Our host today, from Milan, Italy, is author, journalist and personal coach Ayzad.
Welcome! In this episode we talk about daydreaming, privacy, retractable genitals, sex-crazed sculptors, and much more. Let's get starting, and the first topic is space sex. Lately, space exploration is back into fashion thanks to new privately developed rockets and capsules, the Chinese moon missions, and the more and more concrete announcements about wanting to bring human beings on the moon again after a half-century-long stop. Human missions to Mars are frequently discussed too, and enthusiasm and curiosity are high, even if it will take a few more decades for that. The media too are working the subject by answering one of the two most frequent questions about life in space. How do the astronauts go to the loo? Spoiler, they use a vacuum system. The second question clashes instead with a very misplaced reserve, since talking about shit is fine, but other topics are a no-no. So, here's what nobody else will tell you about how zero-gravity sex actually works. First of all, doing it won't kill you. From time to time articles appear misrepresenting an old study about geckos' reproduction on a Soyuz whose subjects died, so they conclude that sitting inside a spaceship is lethal. Truth is, in that case the problem was exquisitely of a climate control nature, since the reptiles ended up frozen. The one true difference with doing it in the outskirts of Tampa is finding yourself in a constant state of free-falling. Besides some queasiness until you get used to it, the biggest issue is merely keeping hold of something fixed throughout it, which actually isn't trivial. Another fabrication is for official research on the subject to exist. During a mission, the crew has very few minutes free from duties, experiments and processes, and they generally use them to take a little break from extremely demanding activities within an extremely hostile environment. Thinking about sex is quite low in the space agency's priorities. This notwithstanding, something was done. Soviet long-term cosmonauts on the Mir always easily admitted they masturbated, but at the same time they denied having done mixed crew erotic experiments, since several committees forbade it, in their words. Let's believe that. And let's also believe that Mark Lee and John Davis, who happened to fly together in the shuttle mission STS-47 just a few weeks after getting married, didn't attempt such a unique experience. Anyway, no official data exists, even if other experiences lead us to suspect these attempts weren't very fun.
Let me interrupt you just a sec for an important reminder. The episode notes contain all the links to the topics mentioned in the podcast, and if you want to dig deeper, you will find hundreds of further articles on the Ayzad.com website.
Fact is, you don't have to be an astronaut to experience the absence of gravity. Excluding intercourse between skydivers, you can take advantage of parabolic flights used to train professionals and to shoot some scenes of science fiction movies. They are large private planes you can charter at a steep price, whose passenger halls have no seats but padded walls. As the name says, the pilots quickly bring them as high as possible, then they free dive so that the people inside do float just like in space. The problem is that the zero-weight phase lasts 25 seconds only, during which you get thrown about the hull, so those who tried that swear it isn't a very arousing experience, especially due to the nausea induced by the return of gravity at the end of every parabola. After all, there is a reason why they call them the vomit comets. Still, someone tried shooting porn during parabolic fight to edit the scene into a movie called The Uranus Experiment Part 2. The protagonists were Sylvia Saint and Nick Lang, but for the aforementioned reasons the results were catastrophic, and the video only shows simulated scenes. and badly at that. So for now, all the zero-G porn is fake. If you are now about to refuse that invitation to participate to a space mission already, please stop, for there is still hope. The matter of sex will probably remain ignored throughout the long work to build a permanent habitat on the Moon, but sooner or later traveling to Mars will become somewhat common, and since that will take more or less 8 months, the tourist's intimacy will have to be taken into account too. We only know 2 things at the moment. That to have intercourse you'll have to strap yourself to your partner or slip into a sort of sex sleeping bag, and that you'll have to use birth control. While space vehicles do offer a decent protection from cosmic radiation, a baby conceived in that environment would be at a very high risk of showing life-threatening mutations. But what about until then? If you really cannot wait 40 years at the last, the sole opportunity you have today is to pay for a private flight to the International Space Station, like 7 millionaires already did since 2001. Your trip will cost you roughly $40 million, plus 15 extra if you also want to go outside on a spacewalk. Or you can keep your fingers crossed and hope for a series of private tourism projects to debut with tickets for about $300,000. Just keep in mind that in that case, you'll be sharing the cabin with 5 other persons. If you are into space orgies, you now know what to do.
The Sexual Explorers Manifesto is a global initiative to spread a healthier and more positive approach to sexuality. You can easily find it with an online search, but in the meantime, let's take a closer look at one of its 15 items. Today's one says:
the only limits to sexual expression are consent and health. The human mind has the ability to find arousing such an extent of different stimuli and fantasies that when it comes to sex, it is meaningless to talk about normalcy, except in its statistic sense of a more or less common form. Judging other people's sexual preferences on the basis of one's own or of pruderies lacking concrete grounds isn't just devoid of any benefit, but a cause for unnecessary distress. Therefore, everyone must be freely allowed to live their sexuality as they wish. Since the ultimate goal is collective wellness, the only cases when it is desirable to impose a limit to such right of expression are those where it decreases the well-being of that person or those around them by endangering their psychophysical health or abusing their consent. Legitimate behaviors follow the SSC principle, short for SAFE, meaning thoughtful to avoid every kind of damage to person and things, sane, as in sensible, rational, and within the limits set by the laws, physiology, etc., and consensual, or within the able and informed consent of everyone involved.
This is your moment. In every episode, we pick one question among those sent to our expert at podcast@ayzad.com. So let's get writing to get an answer like this.
Exploring Unusual Sex's inbox is starting to fill with your questions. This time I picked one at random, but it seems quite interesting. Andrea was laconic and asked, what is the craziest of sex-related madness? Something tells me that by madness you meant an uncommon practice, but if that was the case, you didn't really listen to the other episodes where I repeated how, when it comes to sex, it has no sense to cast that sort of judgment on how people get their kicks. Some ways may be more common than others, but until you stay within the boundaries of law and consent, everything is equally valid. However, if you wanted to know about actual sexual psychosis, I do have an answer. Topping my hit parade of oddities is koro. It is an Indonesian word indicating an anxious syndrome which is typical of Southeastern Asia and in the Han Chinese communities, where it manifests as brief epidemics but can touch hundreds of people. The syndrome is also present in several other cultures under different names, like Ginginia Bemari in India and Rokju in Thailand, and it cyclically reappears in hotspots both in Western Africa and industrialized countries. those hit by this disease become convinced that their sex organs are shrinking or are being sucked inside their bodies. While the phenomenon is entirely imaginary, the local superstitions about traditional medicine drive the victim to feel their lives threatened and to attempt to stretch back their penises, nipples, or breasts, even violently, hurting themselves seriously. Those carnages are absent in those who follow modern medicine, and in any case, Koro spontaneously heal in a period ranging between a few days and a few months. After solving this doubt too, I want to remind everyone that sex should always be a pleasure, not a problem, even when it is uncommon. However, if you are experiencing issues, I can help you as a personal coach to discover together the ideal strategy to win back your happiness in this field. You can get in touch through my website ayzad.com, spelled A-Y-Z-A-D, and saying you are a listener of this podcast will earn you a 20% discount on the first session.
This episode is almost over, but we still have time to read one entry from XXX, the Dictionary of Unusual Sex, available in online bookstores everywhere, but in Italian only for the moment.
Today's entry is agalmatophilia, meaning having sex with statues or mannequins, also known as Pygmalionism or Galateism, after the legend about the love between the sculptor Pygmalion and this Galatea statue. This sounds especially bizarre today, but it must have been relatively more common in the past. For example, a historical account tells us of Lysippos, another Greek sculptor who got into troubles for having skillfully placed a couple of stakes on a goddess effigy in the temple of Samos and having had fun with her. The ancient cult of Priapus called instead for virgins to be deflowered by the satyrs' statues, and still during the Renaissance it was rather common to see simulacra of Catholic saints, Saint Fotino in particular, with interchangeable phalluses to be used by the saintly brotherhoods devoted to them. Its most common contemporary variation is androidism, about which I promise to talk in a future episode. And that really was it. Before leaving you with one last unusual sex fact, I want to thank you for listening and invite you to follow me on my social networks and above all on my website ayzad.com, which is also the ideal place to sign up for my newsletter. That way you'll get straight in your inbox new articles, reviews, invitations to events, and the notification for new podcast episodes which you can listen to and comment pretty much everywhere, like iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Spreaker, and so on. If you liked exploring unusual sex, I would also like to invite you to fill the Tell Me About You form you can find linked in the episode notes, so you will help me make the next episodes even better and closer to your tastes. Finally, you can also lend a hand by telling your friends about this podcast and writing about it on your social networks. Thanks, and before moving on to the next episode, here's the fact I promised you. Right now, 5% of people with a repetitive job are daydreaming about sex.